welcome LT, welcome to Hong Kong.
Thank you.
And the reason that we have LT this afternoon with us is that it very much reflects the can-do spirit of Hong Kong. Because to me, you are not just an investor, but an operator with a very well-proven track record, turn around companies, transform the technology, so on and so forth. So in the coming 20 minutes, we have a lot to cover in terms of FinTech and also broadly investments and how Hong Kong can serve you and the industry better. Just by means of introduction, WestCap is one of the pioneer and important FinTech investor and also operator in the world. And in fact, LT is no stranger to Hong Kong. He has been here a long time, and also at the same time, he has practical experience working in banks and also with startups and Airbnb. So to start with, may I ask a more broad question just to warm up? You have been investing in FinTech for quite some time and incredibly successful. If you are asked to name like 3 key trends for FinTech investments in the coming decade, what will they be?
First of all, thank you very much, and congratulations on a really remarkable event and a proud day for Hong Kong and all the initiatives you put in place. There are many different ways that I think industries will be transformed by FinTech, and some of the most interesting industries is where FinTech can be used to bring transformation. And so the areas that we've seen that I think will be most interesting over the next 10 or so years is, first of all, payments. Payments in currencies, the speed, the accessibility, and platforms built in payments, I think will be a very interesting area. And then there's some areas that are just simply being disrupted. For example, if you think about bank technology, 20 years ago, most systems inside of a bank were proprietary. And so they needed to hire engineers and product people inside the banks to build those technologies. And some of the great technologies of the last 20 years came out of banks. Well, with open sourcing and different types of platforms, technology's moved. And so a lot of the innovation that banks rely on today is happening outside their walls. In fact, in some cases, when I started IPO, which is the leading marketplace for IPOs and structured, it was actually bank software that we had built before we spun it out. It was separate. So I also think, so first I think payments, I think technologies that help enable the banks better serve. And then the last one is the democratization of financial services. There are more and more companies that are finding ways to get financial products in the hand of ordinary consumers. We have investors in a couple of businesses, one called Adipar, one called iCapital. They are essentially breaking down the barriers in the private markets and allowing more retail customers or high net worth customers access those products. So those 3 areas, bank technology, payments, and access to private markets are areas that we think will be really interesting over the coming decade.
Thanks for that. I mean, at least it will serve as investment tips for some of the people here. Payments, access to private markets and banking, etc. But I'm sure that among many of your FinTech investments, some of them are more successful than the others, and some of them may be yielding more, much better results than you originally expect. Can you share with us some of your success stories or potentially, interestingly, failure stories?
Yeah, well, thankfully we haven't had a realized loss before, so I don't know if I have failures, but I think the businesses that surprised me the most over time were the ones where the management teams continued to iterate. So oftentimes, you start with an idea when you start a business, you get funding. That funding can confine you to the original idea that you raised money for. But I think being adaptive and thinking about clever ways to add, if I look back at the original business, in any one of the businesses we started, I could say Airbnb or IPO or any of the businesses that we've been part of operating and founding, we started off with one idea, a core idea that had a broad appeal. And you try to focus on businesses and products that's not generally a lot of people like, but maybe a few people really love, and they adopt it. And they become your key carriers going forward of that business. But I would say the biggest distinction in FinTech businesses that we've invested in or operated between the ones that are successful and the ones that are enormous impact changing on industries is the ability to expand the mission over time, to add new products, new customers, new regions, and continue to iterate. The hallmark of a great business is not just how you started it, but it's whether you can build a culture that continually innovates and challenges the status quo. And if you do that and you do it well, you'll end up with a business that is much larger than what you even intended to build in the first place.
I'm sure among this audience, there are people who are either in startups as investors or working in their own companies, which may not be very techy for the time being, but yet at the same time, they are looking for tips and advice in terms of how they can make themselves technologically more savvy. Are there any advice that you can give them, given all the fintech investments that you have made so far, in terms of how we can internally drive innovation, yet at the same time enhancing overall efficiency of the operation?
No, it's a great question. So the first thing is, find something you love, right? Oftentimes, I think founders are confined to trying to find something that's convenient or an idea. Find something where you love what you're doing. And that's usually defined by a problem that's, sometimes it's a personal problem. Something that you alone you think you can solve. So we use this term when we invest. We look for missionaries, not mercenaries. People who are truly committed to what they're trying to achieve is something we look for in a founder. The second piece is always be a learner. Always see what else is being developed. See what else is happening around you. All businesses are built in an ecosystem. What else is happening in the ecosystem? When I was at Airbnb, I would ask the engineers and product people every week to come in and show me another business in the travel space that we admired for its innovations or its change. So be passionate about what you're doing and always be learning about what technology trends are out there. It happens quickly. The best ideas come from places that you might not find obvious. And listen carefully and foster a culture where people inside the business can challenge the status quo, can have ideas. Why do big companies fail to innovate or innovate less as they get bigger? Because they create a culture of predictability that suffocates innovation. The best companies thrive on that innovation, and that innovation comes from learning and challenging and having a culture where you can be open and you can continue to create long after you've established the business itself.
Just now we talked a lot about fintech, about global trends, and back to where we are now, Hong Kong. And you have been traveling around the world looking for investment opportunities, at the same time trying to harness them through technology. From your views or from your angle, how do you see Hong Kong fit into your overall fintech landscape that you have in mind?
So, you know, I've been doing business here in Hong Kong for as long as I can remember from the early days of my career, both at Blackstone, Airbnb, and then iPrio. We set up our offices here. Hong Kong's always been a cultural, technological, and social gateway to much of the world. And I think, Mr. Secretary, some of the changes that you're making and the policies you're putting in place will extend that leadership. To be able to attract, all great businesses start with talent. People often ask me, what's the secret to Silicon Valley? I live in San Francisco. What's the secret to Silicon Valley? It starts with the talent. Getting the best engineers, the best designers, the best builders. We could not have built Airbnb anywhere else in the United States than San Francisco, I believe, because our access to talent was without. So I think for Hong Kong, thinking about having access to talent, the programs that you're putting in place, and bringing people here, and then empowering them. I actually think some of the ideas, and I'd be interested to ask you, that you're thinking about combining the ecosystem, talent, and capital is really what will drive Hong Kong going forward. I think Hong Kong has an opportunity to seize leadership for fintech development across Asia and the world. I actually think over the last 10 years, in my opinion, I think some of the developments in Chinese companies have led the world. The applications are faster, they're more complicated, social commerce, e-commerce, those trends are here in China. They can be here in Hong Kong as well. And so maybe I'll ask you, Mr. Secretary, a question. What do you think you're doing to kind of maintain that global leadership for Hong Kong as we go through the next decade of financial services and financial technology?
In fact, from my contacts with different stakeholders in this sector, one thing that impressed me most is how we can, through multiple means, enhance the effectiveness and competitiveness of Hong Kong as an ecosystem for fintech. And on that front, first of all, it's definitely policy and regulation. And that's why this morning we made an announcement regarding how we're going to grow this virtual asset ecosystem, including that we are going to allow ETFs on virtual assets, at the same time trying to consult the market to allow retail access to our regulated virtual asset exchanges. That's something that we have done and will continue to do. And another angle, apart from policy and regulation, is regarding the generation of more user case. On the government part, of course, as you have listened to me this morning, we are going to tokenize our green bond issuance. we are also dishing out NFT this time. At the same time, we are contemplating e-Hong Kong dollar and also working with our own country on the CBDC for renminbi. I think all these are the use cases that we generate by the government. But more importantly, we need to have more use cases to be generated by the private sector. Because after all, the best incentive and the best motivation to innovate should lie in the broader private market. And that's why we have a whole series of programs to encourage that. And one thing which stands out is our recent proof of concept subsidy program. The idea is that the government will be a matchmaker. So we'll matchmake a financial institution, which is an established one, like a bank, insurance, so on and so forth, and we'll match that with a FinTech company, which is one of the 800 of them that here in Hong Kong. And we'll give them a subsidy in such a way that the innovations being developed by the FinTech company can be applied in the financial institution that I just named. And the beauty of this is that with the government role basically just giving out a small subsidy, the financial institution has more incentive to adopt the application because they feel more insecure. And also they feel that it got endorsement by the government. But yet at the same time, the FinTech companies find this very welcoming because it allows them to really find a client which may potentially adopt their applications and also commercialize them going forward. The successful rate in terms of commercialization for these projects are really high. Based on our last experience, it's over 70%. That's why in the coming phase 2 of the project, we will strive for higher commercialization and also work with Cyberport, which is our agent, to make it a success. And there's a story that I always quoted, which is interesting. It's about how our FinTech companies has been trying to adopt these use cases as much as possible. And one thing that has come to my mind is a FinTech company which offer a AI analysis for the creditworthiness of companies, such that the banks in general can better assess the creditworthiness of enterprises and make better credit decisions. And that company come to me and say, originally their market is all in Hong Kong. So they charge a certain price for that product, for their services, but it's always their aspiration to go cross-boundary to the mainland. And that's why they're looking for clients over there. And one time they came across a client, which is a bank in the mainland, and they are happy to take on their services. And of course, they asked how much they should pay. And knowing the Greater Bay Area is 10 times the population of Hong Kong, the FinTech company charged them like 10 times of the usual price. And eventually the bank in China is saying it's so cheap because they never have an idea of such an effective innovation being charged at such a low price. I think the moral of this story is that, first of all, the FinTech applications being developed in Hong Kong has a wide application, not just in Hong Kong, but also across the mainland. That's number one. And number two, I would say that it's the government's role, among others, to bring our FinTech companies cross-boundary to China and also cross-boundary to the rest of Asia. Because after all, the government being the government, we command credibility, yet at the same time, we have wider access, which allow our FinTech companies to reach a broader market. And that's exactly what we, the government, and Invest Hong Kong are doing, trying to have a whole series of acceleration programs, helping our FinTech companies not just to grow in Hong Kong, but cross-boundary in Asia, and also cross-border in China.
It's remarkable. In just what you went through, Mr. Secretary, there's like 4 different innovations of what Hong Kong's doing as far as hooking up founders along with companies, solving real applications, supporting the ecosystem. Nowhere else in the world is that happening. So congratulations, just innovation. And I think for investors like us or founders like the folks in the room, this creates an environment that you know you can succeed because you're creating effectively a tailwind that'll help push people towards that success. Remarkable.
Yeah, and just in response to your point about talent, apart from bringing in talent from abroad, that's what we have been trying to do in terms of putting FinTech as one of the key areas in our talent list, and also have a whole series of measures that just announced by the Chief Executive to welcome talents from different parts of the world. We should also focus on really to groom our local talent. Because after all, for the local talent, there are 2 batches that we are after. One batch are already those in the industry. They are looking for ways to upskill themselves. And the other are those yet to be industry, yet they need subsidy or they need support to retool themselves. So these are the areas exactly that we are after. Try to retool people who are yet to be here in FinTech, try to bring them on board, At the same time, for people who are already in this industry, to get them have an enhanced learning capability and a broad exposure in such a way that they can upskill themselves for the future challenges.
Yeah. That's an important part of it, is to be able to create this kind of a network of education and advancement for a wider set. You know, one of the things that the Valley's always struggled with is that talent is tough, and so when the markets are very good, hiring people and scaling your talent base is really difficult.
Yeah.
And so being able to, and there's no government intervention in what's being built in the Valley, and so being able to create that, I think, creates not only opportunity, but also will be very attractive.
Yeah, yeah. But now you're in Hong Kong and you have seen for yourself what our fintech landscape is like. Once you go back to the US or when you see your investors, when you are asked about Hong Kong as a fintech hub or as a fintech market, how will you describe us?
Well, I think first of all, you've already done it. Look who's here. I think it's an amazing event. I don't think anywhere else in the world, I think that there's been such cooperation between the public and the private sector on developing a fintech hub and an ecosystem. And that I think is very revolutionary, to be honest, and very innovative. And the way I would describe it is, you know, almost all the businesses that we invest in, all the businesses we invest in are global businesses, and they look for where to build their hubs, both from a product perspective as well as an innovation perspective. And I think the possibilities in Hong Kong are very interesting. Over the last couple of days, I've had a chance to meet with entrepreneurs and founders. It's just very interesting to hear there's an energy, there's a momentum to what's happening, and I think that's really interesting. Frankly, at a time in the world where a lot of our largest companies are being challenged by governments who are somewhat kind of afraid of the size and success. And so I think being welcoming, giving people an environment. And as far as the startup environment goes right now, I know that we're going through a difficult economic time globally. It's the best time to start a company, is exactly when things are difficult. Some of the best businesses I've started during times of economic stress, because frankly there's less competition and people are seeking innovation, because often innovation means efficiency or moving an industry forward. And so it's actually an incredibly interesting time, now that there's market turmoil, to be able to start and develop businesses.
Yeah. And going back to the talent point, which you mentioned at the outset, apart from grooming our local talent and also bringing into Hong Kong established talent from abroad, I think one thing we have also provided for is that, in fact, many of our local universities in Hong Kong, they have campuses in the mainland. And there's a huge pool of young people who are potentially very techy and very knowledgeable in this area. So we will also extend our net beyond and not cover them, in the sense that for those who are studying in the campuses run by Hong Kong local universities in the mainland, in the GBA in particular, they will be included in the potential talent list that we will be covered in such a way that they can be a strong force to grow our ecosystem together.
I think it's important. I think it's important to show young entrepreneurs that they can do it. They can actually come up with an idea and you can build something amazing. And that creates kind of a reinforcing vision. I think when I started my first company, iPrio, which is ultimately we sold for a couple $2 billion, a global leader, I didn't even know what a startup was. I just had an idea and I thought I could disrupt something and built it. And so showing that example to folks so they can go out and see that there's the ability to learn from each other and excel is incredible. It is the beginning of the seeds of the future companies that will be great.
Yeah. I must say, today at the FinTech Week, we have more than 12,000 people, and they are of different backgrounds. Some of them are looking for money as startups, I suppose, and some others, they are people from financial institutions. And for the former, I'm sure that they are looking for tips from you in terms of what you're looking for from the next startup, in such a way that they can potentially get money from your fund. Any advice to them?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is find a real problem that needs to be solved and find an interesting way to solve it. And so I feel like, I mentioned this before, I feel like the best founders are people who had a passion for the problem they were trying to solve, and they pushed forward to it. Be open to change. Be open to change in your idea. You won't get it completely right, and some of the best companies started as one thing and ended up as another. And my advice is that focus on that. Be open about what you know and what you don't know. And the last piece is something I tell all founders when I meet them. When you undertake the journey of building something that's special to you, something you feel you're uniquely qualified to build, find investors who have built something before. Find an investor who's actually coded or actually created something, because your journey won't be exactly what you expect it to be. It'll be full of good days and bad days and surprises and pivots and changes. But find people who have actually done it before. I've been fortunate enough to start 4 businesses, and I've had investors on my board. While they may have been good investors, the best investors are the ones who could give me real advice, who had actually been there before. Maybe that meant suffering through difficult times. Maybe it meant that they were able to innovate and change things over time. But find investors who can agree with your vision, push you hard, and make you think and adapt and learn and get better every day. And that is where the magic for the best companies come from.
If I have a final question, if you don't mind, it's for the second group who are working for the traditional financial service sector, and they are looking for ways to embrace FinTech. Any advice to them?
Yeah, I think when I was running larger businesses, I would always spend time looking at what was outside our walls and really making sure that I could see what was out there. And so, when I was at Blackstone, I spent a lot of time running technology in addition to being obviously an investor in that business. And I spent a lot of time just meeting with startups who were building technology that might have been relevant to Blackstone. And I would see certain ideas. Now, some of those technologies we actually ended up funding and embracing, and they became huge companies like Carbon Black, or I started iLevel when I was at Blackstone because I realized no one in the industry had ever created a platform for aggregating portfolio company information. That's $1 billion business now. It was just simply an idea that I had that I built at night and on weekends when I was at Blackstone. So I would say for people in traditional businesses, look outside your four walls, be conversant in the technologies around you, find what people are doing, and think about ways they could apply to what you're doing. No one company can out-innovate an entire industry. The way you embrace the industry and see what other innovations are out there, sometimes you build, sometimes you buy, sometimes you partner. And think about it that way and use that to drive your company forward. And if you do, you'll come across things that can help you build your business. You'll find companies that you can be a client and you can inspire them to become great businesses. I mean, there's several billion-dollar businesses that just started as clients of Blackstone. We funded them and then built them.
I think time is up, but I'm sure that we got a lot to learn from you next time when you come back. Thank you so much.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.